Easter resurrection didn't add anything to Jesus that wasn't already there innately, in potential. The resurrection power doesn't add anything to you that isn't already there in potential. I am the resurrection in potential. Together? I am the resurrection in potential. An analogy for it was shared with me by somebody I knew that repaired violins. I don't know how we got into this story, but he talked about the greatest experience that he had when a child would drop a violin or somebody would sit on a violin and the parents would bring it broken-hearted to him to repair. You see, it would always be a student violin. It'd be one of these violins made out of green wood. That's one of the reasons why it was so cheap. They hadn't really aged the wood properly. They'd glue it together. It would play okay, but then they would break it and something would happen. You see, the green wood would age on the violin, creating greater and greater tension until finally the sound would get kind of warped along with the wood itself. And so by sitting down on the violin and cracking it, or dropping it and it cracks open, the tension that builds up in the violin gets released. And when they glue it back together, that violin would play with a new resonance, a new harmony, and a new life. Now, is there anything new in the violin? No. There's nothing that's going to be glommed onto you religiously that's going to make you better. You are already made in the image and likeness of God. But the potential and the power that was placed in you at the beginning that clothes and seems to shield that divine potential within you needs to be released. That potential needs to be released in the same way that the resonance within that violin could be released once that limitation was let go. And you say, well, somebody sat on me. Or I dropped it. I made a mistake. You know, it's those two things in life. Somebody either sits on us or we drop the violin. But what happens is that there is a release of a potential and a power, and that is what this is about. And that power is dynamic. Literally dynamic. You know, when you were in Sunday school, do you remember when the Sunday school teacher taught you that famous quote from Paul? I can do, I'm going to say it in the King James so it's really stuffy. I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. Remember that? I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. Strengtheneth. Do you know what the real word was? It was endunamunti, which is the same word from which the word dynamite comes. It's not this strengtheneth. It is an explosive power. It is that basically I can do things through this divinity, this divine potential and power within me that blows me up, that moves me past my limitations, that releases an energy and a life that can't be contained. And when that happens, your life changes, but it isn't something that's added onto you from the outside. Just like the green violin, that indynamite's power, that dynamic power that's indwelling you, will be released when you decide to make a change in your life and invite the experience in, but it's already there in potential. One of my favorite Unity ministers told me a story of how he became a Unity minister. Ultimately, he was a multiple addict. He drug addiction, alcohol addiction, other addictions. And he said that the time he'd gone into recovery unsuccessfully, finally he was able to turn his life around. But after he was a Unity minister, was helping a lot of people, he asked in meditation one time, what have I ever done to deserve my life turning out so well? I mean, he'd really done some really awful things, and he was wondering, what did I do? And suddenly he flashed in his mind's eye the picture on an on-ramp in Los Angeles of a man shabbily dressed next to a really old car holding a baby, looking really sad. And he remembered that at the very depth, just as he was hitting bottom for the last time, he was driving on this on-ramp and he saw the shabbily dressed man holding the baby next to a broken down car, and he thought, oh, somebody should help this man, and kept driving. And as he saw the guy get smaller and smaller in his rearview mirror, he thought, somebody's got to help this guy. And he said maybe that was the first time in many years, if at all, that he'd ever thought about anybody besides himself, because he was so wrapped up in his own feelings. You see, at that point, he was, because of his choices and because of his addictions, broke. He was out of money. He was feeling sorry for himself. He had no one to love, no one that loved him, he felt. And so he said that guy looked as sad as I felt inside. And somehow I could relate to the guy. So he thought, well, let me check up on him. So he took the next off-ramp, came around, tried a second time. The guy was still there. Kept driving. Took the off-ramp again. The fourth time, he stopped the car. He got out, and he didn't have much money at all, but he worked it out because the guy needed a tow. He had a story that was very sad. He needed the help. He gave him all the money he had with no prospect of getting any more except for $2, which he needed in order to get through the rest of the day. And he said, I found myself speaking words of encouragement and hope to this guy that I didn't believe for myself, let alone for him. And he looked at me with these eyes of happiness and wonder. And I will never forget the look on his face. And I drove away thinking to myself, what did I just do? But what did he just do? He activated that power, that potential that dwelt in him from the beginning. He said, nothing could change in my life until I finally realized that there might be something that somebody else might need besides me, that somebody else needs might be as important as my own or more important, and that I needed to get outside of myself and reach outside of myself. And he said, when I did that, doors started opening for me. I can do all things through Christ which endynamites me. Together? I can do all things through Christ which endynamites me. And realize this is not a religious experience necessarily. It is an innate experience within all human beings, placed in the beginning, and we've got to transcend the limitations of our view, of our culture's limited view of what this is about. And what happens? Well, the story is told, this is going back to Good Friday. Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry, saw how he died, and said, surely this innocent man was the Son of God. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Okay, this is something we've got to think about. The curtain of the temple. What is that? Well, remember the Ark of the Covenant? Okay, Indiana Jones. You know that? Okay, so the Ark of the Covenant was there in the temple, and nobody could get near it except for one person once a year. It was the high priest. Now, the high priest, as you know from the story, was corrupt, but he was allowed to go in once a year to the Ark of the Covenant, and that was it. So it was a very special thing, and this represented divinity. It represented God. It represented the source of this transformative, endynamiting power. And it was veiled for everybody. And only the priest could go in, and only once a year. And people, the common people, were separated from it. But when that curtain tore, it symbolized that you don't need a high priest. You don't need the religious, in this case corrupt religious officials, to intercede for you. You don't need an intermediary, that there is that innate power within you. But even more so, it represents the curtain between what you think is your personal self and what you think is your spiritual self. That curtain that you hold between the spiritual part of you and the personal part of you that you think somehow, it's on Sunday I do this, and on Monday through Saturday I do this, or oh, that's not for me, that's for all those religious people, or something. It's all one thing. That curtain is torn. The curtain between you and your spiritual self is torn, and you don't have to hold back anymore out of that complacency that says, I just, that's fine for somebody else. It's ready for you, and it doesn't add anything to you that wasn't already there. It's a strange thing. You think Jesus changed. He traded in his old body for a new one. No. What happened was a different relationship with himself. The cells of his body, when the curtain was torn, it symbolized within him that the humanity and the divinity, that separation was no longer, and that divine energy could rush in and transform, not change, but transform the relationship with itself. It's like that violin. The relationship with itself is transformed, and that potential and power is unleashed. That Good Friday experience is the releasing of all that is negative and no longer needed in order to do what? Indeed, in order to do what? To have that endynamiting power. And it changes you from top to bottom, from inside out. You know the story. We always talk about at Easter about the caterpillar and the butterfly, okay? And the butterfly represents the resurrection. The caterpillar is the old consciousness. Fine. But do you know there's nothing in the caterpillar that wasn't in the butterfly? Nobody put any new cells into the caterpillar. The caterpillar is just the butterfly in potential, all the same cells. The butterfly doesn't have anything new in it that wasn't already in the caterpillar, except it leaves behind something. It's what they call in football addition through subtraction. It's letting go of the chrysalis. Remember that? Remember the chrysalis? Let me read to you a poem from my minister 40 years ago when I was playing the organ in a church, and I kept this from her Easter service. I have seen a butterfly. I know what it used to be. How easily I say it was a caterpillar yesterday. But if I could just pause to see, what wonder there. Heeding a call, it left the homey branch on which it used to cling, surrendered to the dark, wherein some spark would lift its life from crawl to miracle of wing. Moving from that two-dimensional, flat surface, down on the ground, munching on leaves, caterpillar, into what? The chrysalis. Now, what is that? That's the tomb experience. And during that period of time when Jesus was in the tomb, you think about it, sensory deprivation, there's nothing going on, no sound, no light, no words, no nothing, just potential, and something happens from within. The same thing takes place with a caterpillar. The same thing takes place within you and me when we allow ourselves to move into this new awareness. But it takes moving into that middle part, that I don't know part. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Who am I now? I thought I knew who I was, but everything seems so dark and so quiet. You know, when you do this, when you move into this spiritual nature of you, things show up differently. And you don't necessarily choose it, it just happens to you. When I came here, I want to tell a story. When I came here for my audition talk, and I was told, you must give your talk from behind this lectern. And you can't get out from behind it. And I said, I told them a story. I said, I can't do that. They said, yes, you have to, because we have to make a recording. And this is the microphone that will pick you up. I said, I don't know. I'll just talk loud. You know, I couldn't do it. And I said, let me tell you a story. My very first church, I had gone for 2 weekends for a retreat, done my inner work, done my processing. I'd done a lot of journaling, done a lot of meditating, a lot of praying, and I'd spent a lot of time in quiet. When I came back the next week, I felt better. I felt different, sort of, but it wasn't anything that I could put my finger on. But when I got behind that church's lectern, which was the size of a refrigerator made out of wood, and I went up to here, and I was like this, and I just went, I can't. I felt like I was suffocating, and I had to come out. I didn't make a decision. It made a decision for me. The resurrecting power will make a decision for you. You will change. Think about those great spiritual beings who have taken those spiritual steps and see how they show up differently. The Dalai Lama, Lynn went to see him in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And the thing about the guy is that his handlers go crazy. He drives them nuts because he's walking along to whatever it is. And here he is, somebody who, people have a lot of animosity toward him. The Chinese government has a lot of animosity. So they really have to watch what he does. But he's always running off into the crowd, shaking people's hands, talking to people, talking to children, seeing somebody he knows, because he's spontaneous. Jesus said, when you are born spiritually, when you have this inner experience, the wind blows from here to there, you don't know where it's coming from or where it's going, and so it is with the one born of the Spirit. And so this is what happens. Gandhi would go to London to meet with Winston Churchill, and sometimes they would be worried that he'd be late because he'd be out in the street playing soccer, what they call football, with the children. And he was good too. There was a spontaneity about him. George Washington Carver was a great spiritual being who came to do a great spiritual work. And when Booker T. Washington invited George Washington Carver to come on the faculty of the Tuskegee Institute, he took the train down from Iowa State, and he was going to get off the train, and they had a big band there. They had a big group of people. They were all going to greet him, and he wasn't there. He didn't get off the train. They didn't know what to think. And then somebody said, look, And down about a half a mile, he jumped off the train because he saw some flowers he wanted to examine. And he was jumping back and forth looking at all the flowers. He was in the moment. This power, this in-dynamiting power, transforms your experience of life. You know, many of you 40 years ago read a book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Remember that? Remember that book? Yeah, you read that book. And in it, you notice that Jonathan Livingston Seagull looked the same before and after his inner transformation. The difference being that afterwards, he could soar. He didn't just fly. He had this additional experience of potential expressing. You grow past your limitations and your problems, and you soar. You can't control this power. It is moving in and through you as you. It is something that is, but it's necessary to go through what is called in the story the tomb experience. And let me read that passage to you. You've heard so many times on so many Easters, but listen to it from a different place. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early while it was still dark in the tomb, and she saw the stone that had been taken away. So she ran and she talked to Simon Peter and to John, the one who Jesus loved, and she said to him, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and I don't know where they put him." Peter went forth, and the other disciples, they ran together toward the tomb, and the other disciple outran Peter and came first to the tomb, but stooping and looking in, he saw the linen clothes lying, yet he did not enter in. Simon Peter also came, and following him, entered into the tomb, and he noticed the linen clothes lying there, and the burial napkin upon the head was not lying with the linen clothes, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then entered into that tomb the other disciple, and saw and believed. As yet they did not know yet the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. What is this about? This is talking about what was left behind. The only thing left behind was what's called the Shroud of Turin, but it's the burial clothes. It's like the chrysalis. It's that old experience. You must honor it. You must revere the experience that brought you to this place. But the butterfly doesn't worship the chrysalis. The butterfly looks at the chrysalis and says, "That was a part of me. It came out of me. I had those experiences. They seemed to bring me an experience of darkness and undifferentiated goo where I didn't know who I was. But I came out of it, and now look at who I am." And the experiences of life that have brought you to this place where you're ready to take this great step in your spiritual development, those experiences, you'll honor them, you'll respect them, but you won't let them define you anymore. They brought you to this place. That was that tomb-like experience. I've often shared the wonderful story of the communist Chinese prisoner, Sidney Rittenberg, who was an atheist. He didn't have any religious language or understanding whatsoever. He had gone over there because he was going to run their communications, and he was in charge of Radio Peking and all the different radio and media. He was actually the guy in charge. And then the Russians drummed up some false charges because they were concerned about an American being in those positions. And so they threw him into solitary confinement for 7 years. And they wouldn't let him speak or have anybody speak to him. He was in that tomb experience, and he at first went into that undifferentiated goo. He didn't know. They did it to break him psychologically. Well, it broke him open, like the violin got broke open. But he said, I started thinking about what life was and what was my mind and what was really behind and inside of all things. And he said, I began to have these spontaneous experiences, which later I found out matched up perfectly. And I'd match them up and line them up with any of the mystical experiences. He said, I felt I was totally out of it and totally into it. Now, here was a man who had no religious language, no religious training, no understanding of what was happening to him, but simply the willingness to go through it. And rather than it breaking him down, it opened him up. Now, you may have people in your life who have different belief systems than you. They may have no system at all. They may believe something and they want to impose it on you. Step away from the argument. And back off, because they have the same indwelling potential and power in them that you do, and they are doing probably just exactly what they need to do, and in the fullness of time they will have the experience that they need that will open them up to this possibility, to this guidance, and to this peace. And what happens then? Well, in Jonathan Livingston's sequel, he soared. In the butterfly, it flies. And Jesus sang a song, according to early church fathers, that we don't often hear about, that tells us to dance. What happens is that this potential and power, this indynamiting power, frees you to sing the song God placed in you at the beginning and to dance the dance that is yours to express. This is called the Hymn of Jesus, and the early church fathers wrote about it, and they actually sang it in the very earliest church services, according to historians. We've lost the melody, thank goodness, so I can't sing it to you. But it's called the Hymn of Jesus, and listen to this. This is supposedly his words. I am the Word who has played and danced everything into being. Understand me by dancing yourself. Now dance with me. If you won't dance, you'll never know what's going on. I want to play my flute now, so all of you dance. Everyone, you were made to dance, so now dance. You dance. Make the decision here and now that you're open to something more. Make the decision here and now to allow the veil of the temple to part, and that divine self, that energy that was within you from the very beginning, made in the image and likeness of God, will rush through and energize yourselves, energize your beingness, and give you the answers that you need. But it requires you to give your consent, like that minister did, by stepping outside of yourself, by making a decision, or by taking the time to do your spiritual practices. You don't have to be thrown into a prison in solitary confinement. You can do it in your everyday life. And when you do this, you're activating this potential, this power, and you're letting it out. And that, my friends, is what resurrection is about. So, let's take this within and set aside all the things in your hands and move right into this awareness. Imagine that once again you're absorbing the energy that is in the here and now, that is around and within you, that has been placed in your center at the beginning of time and is activated every Easter when 1 billion people decide and are in agreement that there is something more. And it changes the fundamental nature, the relationship of a thing to itself. Jesus to his body, the caterpillar to the butterfly, and you into your divine nature. So absorb this energy, lift yourself up into this energy, and move into an awareness that says, yes, I want this something more. And if there's something in your life that needs some help, I want this to be practical. And so know that you are expanding and lifting beyond the confines of this so-called problem. And this very dynamic power is in filling and transforming everything. And now, so whatever we do during the rest of this day, we know that this activity is taking place. It is set in space and in time, and it is doing its work. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And so it is. Amen. Now let's prepare by taking a deep breath and letting it out. And set aside anything in your hands. You're going to want to play with paper, but just set it down. Open up your hands. Maybe if you want, place your hands face up. And feel yourself absorbing, taking into your beingness, the energy of billions of people celebrating Easter for 2,000 years. The energy of 1 billion people in services around the world this morning. They all have different stories to tell, different belief systems. But the one thing that they hold in common is that there is a special something this morning to absorb into our being, a thought for that has been created that transforms our awareness and opens us up. Open up. And imagine yourself like a sponge soaking up this energy, this life, this light, this vibration, and let it fill you and feel yourself expanding. The truth of your being is that only by growing bigger than the conditions of your life can you heal and transform them. And so you expand beyond the confines of the personal you into the divine you that has that wonderful possibility. Paul called it Christ in you, your hope of glory. And it is that explosive and expansive power that is greater than any condition in life. And so recognize that whatever the problem is you came in with this morning, there is that in you which is greater than, in which this problem is absorbed and dissolved. Your limitation is transformed and you are lifted up to that place where you've grown bigger. Feel yourself expanding. Imagine that you are infilling with light and love energy. That whatever this resurrection morning is about, it is about the light, the life that transforms all conditions, that grows us into that something more. We are not meant to be crawling caterpillars. We are meant to be flying butterflies. We are not meant to be limited personal selves. We're meant to be spiritual beings of great expansion and light. And so we move into this awareness. We embrace it and take a moment just to imagine that you are infilling, absorbing, expanding, filled with light, shining forth. Whatever I think of Easter, whatever my concept is of resurrection, in this now moment, I am transcending that which I thought was limiting me and growing beyond it. In this moment, I am absorbing this divine energy and lifting up into that which is greater than any limitation. In this moment, I move into my greater awareness. I am grateful for this rising up and this freedom. And so it is. All right, so we're taking this our offering statement. I give from my transformed self and I receive abundantly. Together. I give from my transformed self and I receive abundantly. And silently. And again aloud together. I give from my transformed self and I receive abundantly. And so it is. Amen.